Thought to be America's most prolific serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas had a partner in crime. With his accomplice, Ottis Toole, he confessed to over 360 murders. 157 of these confessions have been checked out by the authorities and proved to be genuine. Lucas's mother was half Chippewa. She was drunk most of the time on corn liquor which she bought with the proceeds of prostitution, conducted on the floor of her shack in front of her husband and children. She was known to be as mean as a rattlesnake and packed the 7 children from her first marriage off to a foster home. Lucas's father worked on the railways and lost both legs in an accident. Lucas's mother and her pimp beat her children constantly. After one beating, Henry was unconscious for 3 days and suffered damage to his brain. Another accident left him with a glass eye. Henry was made to grow his hair long and wear a dress so that he could be pimped out to both men and women. The county court put an end to this forced cross-dressing when his school complained. At the age of 10, Henry Lucas was introduced to sex by Bernard Dowdy, yet another of his mother's lovers. Dowdy was mentally retarded. He would slit the throat of a calf and have sex with the carcass. He encouraged the boy to do the same. Lucas enjoyed this activity, and from childhood onwards, he associated sex with death. Throughout his childhood, Lucas continued to have sex with animals, sometimes skinning them alive for sexual pleasure. At 14, he turned his perverted attention to women. He beat a 17-year-old girl unconscious at a bus stop and raped her. When she came to and started screaming, he choked the life out of her, or so he claimed. At 15, he was sent to a reformatory for burglary. 2 years of hard labor on a prison farm did nothing to reform him. When he was released, he returned to housebreaking. He was caught again and sent back to jail. He escaped, then met and fell in love with a girl called Stella. They stayed together for 4 years and she agreed to marry him. Then his mother turned up, demanding that her son take care of her. After a violent row, Lucas killed her. This time, he got 40 years, but served just 10. By 1970, the authorities considered Lucas a reformed character and released him. He killed a woman within hours of getting out. In 1971, he was arrested for attempting to rape 2 teenage girls at gunpoint. His only excuse was that he craved women all the time. Released in 1975, he married a woman called Betty Crawford. The marriage broke up when Betty discovered that he was having sex with her 9-year-old daughter and trying to force himself on her 7-year-old. Lucas then moved in with his sister but was thrown out when he started having sex with her daughter too. In 1978, he met another sex murder freak called Ottis Toole in a soup kitchen in Jacksonville, Florida. He was a sadist with homosexual tendencies. He often dressed as a woman to pick up men in bars. He even started a course of female hormones as part of his ambition to have a sex change. Toole was also a pyromaniac and would achieve orgasm at the sight of a burning building. Lucas and Toole became lovers, and together they embarked on a series of violent robberies which frequently involved murder, often for the sheer pleasure of it. In Toole's confession, he admitted that around that time, they saw a teenage couple walking along a road after their car had run out of petrol. Toole shot the boy, while Lucas forced the girl into the back of the car. After he had finished raping her, he shot her 6 times, and they dumped her body by the roadside. This was one of the cases the police could confirm. Another killing occurred outside Oklahoma City. There they had picked up a girl called Tina Williams when her car broke down. Lucas shot her twice and had sex with her dead body. In 1978, Lucas and Toole were in Maryland when a man asked them whether they would help him transport stolen cars. This was too tame a sport for hardened criminals such as them, they explained. He then asked them whether they were interested in becoming professional killers. They said that they were. The one proviso was that they had to join a Satanist cult. Lucas and Toole claimed to have been inducted into the Hand of Death sect in Florida by a man named Don Materick. As part of the initiation, Lucas had to kill a man. He lured the victim to a beach and gave him a bottle of whiskey. When the man threw his head back to take a swig, Lucas cut his throat. As part of the cult activity, Lucas and Toole kidnapped young prostitutes who were forced to perform in pornographic videos, which often turned out to be snuff movies. They also abducted children and took them across the border into Mexico, where they were sold or used as sacrifices in satanic ceremonies. These children may have been delivered to Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, the bisexual high priest, and his one-time lover, the beautiful American college-educated Sara Maria Aldret, known as La Bruja the Witch. They murdered and mutilated children in Mexico during satanic rites. Their victims' genitals were cut out and their brains boiled. The flesh of gringos was especially in demand. Around that time, Toole introduced Lucas to his 11-year-old niece, Becky Powell, who was slightly mentally retarded. She lived in Toole's mother's house in Florida, where they were staying. Toole had been seduced by his older sister, Drusilla, before he became homosexual, and he enjoyed watching his pickups make love to Becky or her older sister, Sarah. When Drusilla committed suicide, Becky and her brother Frank were put in care. Lucas decided to rescue them. By January 1982, they were on the run together, living off the money they stole from small grocery stores. Becky called Lucas a daddy. But one night when he was tickling her innocently at bedtime, they began to kiss. Lucas undressed her, then stripped off himself. Becky was only 12, he said, but she looked 18. During his time with Becky, Lucas continued his murderous rampage with Toole. Lucas outlined a typical fortnight in Georgia. In the space of 2 weeks, they kidnapped and murdered a 16-year-old girl, then raped her dead body, and abducted, raped, and mutilated a blonde woman. Another woman was abducted from a parking lot and stabbed to death in front of her children. In the course of one robbery, the store owner was shot. Another man died in a second robbery. In a third, the store owner was stabbed. And in a fourth, a woman was tied up before being stabbed to death. Toole also tried to force his sexual attentions on a young man. On being spurned, Toole shot him. Becky and her brother Frank were often in on the robberies and witnessed several of the murders. Eventually, Lucas and Toole parted company. Toole took Frank back to Florida while Lucas and Becky got a job with a couple named Smart, who ran an antique shop in California. After 5 months, the Smarts sent Lucas and Becky to Texas to look after Mrs. Smart's 80-year-old mother, Kate Rich. A few weeks later, Mrs. Smart's sister visited her mother to find the place filthy. Lucas had been taking her money to buy beer and cigarettes. She found him drunk in bed with Becky, and the two of them were fired. They were hitchhiking out of town when they were picked up by the Reverend Reuben Moore, who had started a religious community nearby called the House of Prayer. Lucas and his 15-year-old common-law wife quickly became converts and lived in a converted chicken barn. While they were staying at the House of Prayer, Becky seems to have had a genuine change of heart. She was homesick and she wanted to go back to Florida. Reluctantly, Lucas agreed and they set off hitchhiking. At nightfall, they settled down with their blankets in a field. It was a warm June night. A row broke out about Becky's decision to return home. She struck him in the face. He grabbed a knife and stabbed her through the heart. Then he had sex with her corpse, cut her body up and scattered its dismembered pieces in the woods. So, after killing Becky, who Lucas later described as the only woman he had ever loved, he returned to the House of Prayer. He too seems to have had some sort of change of heart. One Sunday he dropped around to Mrs. Rich's house to offer her a lift to church. She accepted, but during the journey she began to question him about the whereabouts of Becky. Lucas pulled a knife and stabbed it into her side. She died immediately. He drove her to a piece of waste ground where he undressed and raped her corpse. He stuffed her naked body into a drainage pipe that ran under the road. Later, he collected it in a garbage bag and burned it in the stove at the house of prayer. Sheriff Bill F. Hound Dog Conway of Montague County, Texas, had begun to have his suspicions about Lucas when he reappeared without Becky. Now he was linked to the disappearance of two women. Lucas was hauled in for questioning. Lucas was a chain smoker and heavy caffeine addict. Conway deprived him of both cigarettes and coffee, but still he refused to break. Lucas maintained that he knew nothing about the disappearance of Kate Rich, and that Becky had run off with a truck driver who promised to take her back to Florida. Finally, Sheriff Conway had to release him. Soon afterwards, Lucas told the Reverend Moore that he was going off to look for Becky. He headed for Missouri, where he saw a young woman standing beside her car in a petrol station. He held a knife to her ribs and forced her back into the car. They drove south towards Texas. When she dozed off, Lucas pulled off the road with the intention of raping her. She awoke suddenly to find a knife at her neck. He stabbed her in the throat, pushed her to the ground, and cut her clothes off. After he had raped her dead body, he dragged it into a copse and took the money from her handbag. He abandoned her car in Fredericksburg, Texas, and returned to the house of prayer. While he was away, the Reverend Moore had told Sheriff Conway that Lucas had given Becky a gun for safekeeping. Lucas was a convicted felon and had, consequently, forfeited his right to bear arms. It was enough to put him back in the slammer. Sheriff Conway again deprived him of coffee and cigarettes. This time, Lucas began to crack. He was found hanging in his cell with his wrists slashed. After being patched up in the prison hospital, Lucas was put in a special observation cell in the women's wing. The next night, he cracked completely. In the early hours of the morning, he started yelling. When the jailer arrived, Lucas claimed that there was a light in his cell and it was talking to him. The man on night duty, Joe Dan Weaver, knew that Lucas had already smashed the bulb in his cell and told him to get some sleep. Later in the night, Lucas called the jailer again and confessed that he had done some pretty bad things. Weaver advised him to get down on his knees and pray. Instead, Lucas asked Weaver for a pencil and paper. Lucas spent the next half hour writing a note to Sheriff Conway. It read, "I have tried to get help for so long, and no one will believe me. I have killed for the past 10 years, and no one will believe me. I cannot go on doing this. I have killed the only girl I ever loved." When the confession was finished, Lucas pushed it out of the cell door's peephole. Weaver read it and called Sheriff Conway. He knew the sheriff would not mind being woken in the middle of the night under these circumstances. When Sheriff Conway arrived, he plied Lucas with coffee and cigarettes and asked about the murders. Lucas said that he had seen a light in his cell and it had told him to confess his sins. Then he told the sheriff that he had killed Kate Rich. Later, Sheriff Conway and Texas Ranger Phil Ryan asked Lucas what had happened to Becky Powell. Tears flowed from his one good eye as Lucas told how he had stabbed, raped, and dismembered her. The story left the two hardened law officers feeling sick and wretched. "Is that all?" asked Ryan wearily, half hoping it was. "Not by a long way," said Lucas. "I reckon I killed more than 100. The next day, Montague County Police began to check out Lucas's story. Near the drainage pipe where Lucas had temporarily hidden Mrs. Rich's body, they found some of her underclothes and her glasses broken. At the house of prayer, they found some burnt fragments of human flesh and some charred bones. Lucas took them to the field where he had killed Becky. they found her suitcase full of women's clothing and makeup. Her skull, pelvis, and other parts of her body were found in the woodland nearby, in an advanced stage of decomposition. He began to confess to other murders too often in breathtaking detail. These too checked out. A week after he had begun to confess, Lucas appeared in court, charged with the murders of Kate Rich and Becky Powell. When asked whether he understood the seriousness of the charges against him, Lucas said he did, and confessed to about 100 other murders. The judge, shocked, could scarcely credit this and asked Lucas whether he had ever undergone psychiatric examination. Lucas said he had, but they didn't want to do anything about it. I know it ain't normal for a person to go out and kill girls just to have sex. Lucas's sensational testimony made huge headlines, and the news wires quickly carried the story to every paper in the country. Police departments in every state and county began checking their records, and Lucas's confessions were run through the computer at the newly established National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. Toole, it was discovered, was already in prison. He had been sentenced to 15 years for arson in Springfield. In jail, he had begun regaling a cellmate with the tale of how he had raped, murdered, beheaded, barbecued, and eaten a child named Adam Walsh. Suddenly, in the light of Lucas's confession, the police began taking his story seriously. Both Lucas and Toole continued to confess freely. They admitted to a series of robberies of convenience stores. At one, they had tied up a young girl. She had wriggled free, so Lucas had shot her in the head, and Toole had had sex with her dead body. Lucas went on a 1,000-mile tour of murder sites. In Duval Country, Florida, Lucas confessed to 8 unsolved murders. The victims had been women ranging in age from 17 to 80. Some had been beaten, some strangled, some stabbed, and some shot. Lucas said that the hand of death said he should vary his M.O. Near Austin, Texas, Lucas pointed out a building and asked whether it had been a liquor store once. It had. Lucas confessed to murdering the former owners during a robbery in 1979. In the same county, Lucas led them to a field where he had murdered and mutilated a girl called Sandra Dubbs. He even pointed out where her car had been found. Lucas and Toole had cruised Interstate 35, murdering tramps, hitchhikers, men who were robbed of their money, and old women who were abducted from their homes. They had killed more than 20 people up and down that highway alone, over a period of 5 years. One was a young woman who was found near Austin, naked except for a pair of orange socks. She had been hitchhiking on the interstate when Lucas had picked her up. She refused to have sex with him, so Lucas strangled her and took what he wanted. She was never identified, but Lucas was sentenced to death for her murder. Although he withdrew his confession to the Becky Powell murder and pleaded not guilty, he was found guilty anyway and sentenced to life. On top of that, he received 4 more life sentences, 2 sentences of 75 years each and 1 of 67 years, all for murder. During his confessions, Lucas told the police that Toole had poured petrol over a 65-year-old man and set him alight. They had hidden so that they could watch the fire engines arrive. The police identified the man as George Sonnenberg. He had died 4 days later. Until then, they had assumed that the fire was an accident. Toole freely admitted the murder and claimed to have started hundreds of other fires. But it was for this particularly horrific murder that Toole, as well, was sentenced to death. Lucas and Toole enjoyed their brief celebrity and took a certain relish in revealing the ghoulish details of their shocking crimes. Both their death sentences were commuted. Toole died of cirrhosis at the Florida State Prison on the 15th of September, 1996, at the age of 49. His body went unclaimed and he was buried in the prison cemetery. Lucas died of heart failure on the 12th of March 2001, aged 64, in the Texas State Penitentiary at Huntsville, Texas, and was buried in Captain Joe Bird Cemetery, aka Peckerwood Hill, in Huntsville, Texas. He lies in an unmarked grave after vandals repeatedly damaged or stole his tombstone.